Silence swallowed the upscale Italian restaurant at midnight like a predator closing its jaws. The candlelit booth in the back corner, where white tablecloths gleamed under amber light, where the scent of garlic and aged wine hung thick enough to choke on, that silence was the kind that preceded violence. Nicholas Moretti sat motionless, his black suit tailored to perfection, the fabric worth more than everything Cassandra Rivera would earn in a year of double shifts. His dark eyes, storm gray in certain light, lifted from his wine glass as the figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the restaurant's golden glow. She was barely standing. One eye swollen completely shut, the skin around it blooming in shades of purple and black like a bruise that had rotted from the inside out. Her throat bore handprints, 5 fingers on each side, dark and deliberate, the kind of marks that told a story no one wanted to hear. Her waitress uniform, the cheap polyester kind that smelled perpetually of coffee and grease, hung torn at the shoulder. Blood dripped from a split lip onto the polished marble floor, one drop after another, each one hitting with a sound like a tiny bell tolling. In her trembling hand, she clutched a piece of paper. A court summons. Crumpled. Stained. Marco, Nicholas's first lieutenant, a man built like a concrete wall with cold eyes to match, tensed instantly. His hand drifted toward the inside of his jacket where he kept insurance against uncertainty. Pietro, the second lieutenant, leaned forward with the predatory slowness of a man who had spent 20 years perfecting the art of reading threats. But Nicholas did not move. His daughter, Emma, age 6, sat in the corner booth with crayons scattered across the white tablecloth, coloring a picture of a house with too many windows and a sun that didn't match the sky. She did not look up. She had learned early that certain silences required complete invisibility. "You don't even remember me, do you?" Cassandra's voice was barely audible, trembling like a candle in the wind. The words tore out of her before she could stop them, before self-preservation could close her throat. "I saved your daughter's life and you let them destroy mine." Nicholas raised one finger, just one, and the entire room froze like a photograph. Marco's hand withdrew from his jacket. The waitstaff in the distance stopped moving. Even the soft clink of dishes from the kitchen ceased. In 15 years of working for Nicholas Moretti, Marco had never seen his boss caught off guard. Had never seen anything penetrate that wall of absolute control. And now, looking at this battered woman standing in the doorway, something shifted in Nicholas's face. Recognition. Not of who she was in this moment, but of what she represented. 3 days earlier, during the summer thunderstorm that had torn through Boston's parking lots with biblical fury, a young girl had nearly stepped into traffic. And this woman, this nobody waitress in a torn uniform, had pulled her into her chest and held her against the lightning and rain. Had shielded his daughter with her own body. Emma had told him that night, sitting in his car with wet hair and wide eyes. She was so warm, Daddy. Even though she was scared, she was warm. He had asked Marco to find her? Not to help her. Not yet. Just to find her. To know who she was. What he did not know was that in those 3 days, a man named Preston Mercer, her landlord, a collector of debts and destroyer of lives, had manufactured accusations against her. Theft at the diner where she worked. False evidence posted across social media before she could even understand what was happening. By the time she received the court summons in the mail this evening, her name had already been dragged through the machinery of public shame. And she was alone. No money for a lawyer. No family to call. No one to stand beside her as the system that was supposed to protect the innocent began its methodical destruction. Cordelia Blackwood, Preston's associate, a woman whose cruelty operated through whispered lies and calculated social destruction rather than fists, a woman who understood that the internet was a weapon far more efficient than any gun, had orchestrated it all. Cordelia, who believed that people like Cassandra were disposable. Useful only for the leverage they could provide. The court appearance was in 3 days. The hearing that would determine whether she lost her apartment, her job, her freedom itself. Nicholas studied her face with the intensity of a man accustomed to reading truth in the smallest details. The black eye. The handprint on her throat. The way she gripped the summons like it was a letter of execution. "Sit," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like something carved into stone. "I don't want to sit," Cassandra said. Her hands were shaking so violently that the summons slipped and fluttered to the floor. "I want you to remember me. I want you to remember that I saved her life. I want—" Her voice cracked completely. She did not cry. Something in her had learned that crying was a luxury she could not afford. "I want someone to help me." In the corner booth, Emma set down her crayon. She was 6 years old, which meant she understood very little about the adult world except for the one thing that mattered: when someone you loved was hurting, you noticed. "Daddy." Emma's voice was small and certain. "That's the lady." From the rain. Nicholas rose from his seat slowly, deliberately, each movement controlled with the precision of a man who had spent decades perfecting the performance of power. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered in a way that suggested both genetics and the kind of violence that built muscle through necessity rather than vanity. A silver scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone, the kind of scar that made people think twice about challenging him. He had not been this tall, this powerful, always. But that was a different story. A story that would have to wait. "What is your name?" he asked. "Cassandra." The word came out barely above a whisper. "Cassandra Rivera." "Cassandra," he repeated, and the way he said her name made it sound like something that mattered. "You saved my daughter's life. The storm, 3 nights ago. That was you." "Yes." She swallowed, and the motion clearly caused her pain. The handprints on her throat shifted with the movement, blooming darker. "But I didn't know who she was. I didn't know who you were. She almost stepped into traffic. I couldn't not save her." Marco exchanged a look with Pietro, the kind of look that passed between men who had witnessed something unprecedented. In 15 years of working for Nicholas Moretti, they had never heard him thank anyone for anything. Had never seen him rise from his seat for a person outside his immediate circle of power. Had never heard him speak a woman's name with something that sounded almost like reverence. "Tell me what happened," Nicholas said. "Tell me everything." And so, in the candlelit booth of an upscale Italian restaurant at midnight, a broken woman began to tell her story to a man whose name carried weight in Boston's underworld, a man who understood power, who understood loyalty, who understood the code that bound certain people together. If you saved someone's life, you became bound to them forever. You became indebted in ways that went beyond money. Nicholas listened without interrupting. He listened while the scent of garlic and wine hung in the air. He listened while his daughter returned to her coloring, the crayons moving again across the white tablecloth. He listened while Marco and Pietro exchanged glances that suggested the evening had just shifted into something neither of them had anticipated. And as Cassandra spoke, her voice growing stronger even as her body remained broken, Nicholas Moretti made a decision that would echo through Boston's underworld for months to come. A decision that would transform the trajectory of both their lives. A decision that would prove, finally, that even in the darkest corners of the city, where men dealt in violence and power, there was still room for something the system had forgotten how to recognize. Mercy. But mercy, Nicholas understood, required a price. And that price would be paid in full. Before we continue, drop a like if this story is hitting your heart. Share it with someone who needs to know that help exists in unexpected places, and subscribe so you don't miss the moment when the truth comes crashing down. Hit that notification bell, you won't want to miss what's coming. Now let us go back to the beginning. 3 days before this moment. To $78 crumpled in Cassandra's hand and a summer storm that changed everything. 3 days earlier, in a studio apartment that smelled like stale coffee and worn carpet, Cassandra Rivera pulled her orthopedic shoes off at 3 in the morning. Her feet throbbed in ways that made her feel ancient. The neon sign from the diner below, red letters spelling "Eat Here," buzzed and flickered through her single window, casting her shadow against the wall like a ghost that refused to leave. She sat on the edge of her mattress, the only furniture in the room besides a plastic chair and a shelf holding 3 coffee mugs, and she counted the money. $78. Every bill was crumpled, worn soft from handling, some of them stained with coffee and grease from the diner's kitchen. She laid them out on the white sheet, organizing them by denomination the way she had done every night for 6 months. It was a ritual now, this counting, this desperate arithmetic that never added up to enough. The envelope lay on the pillow beside her. Final notice stamped across it in red ink, like a warning, like a death sentence, like a curse that could not be erased. Preston Mercer had sent it 3 days ago, and the words inside told her something she already knew in her bones: $22,000. Due in 72 hours. Or eviction. Or legal action. Or all of it at once. Her mother's medical debts. Cancer treatments from 8 years ago that had burned through their savings, their house, their future. And when her mother died anyway, the debts didn't die with her. Instead, they transferred to Cassandra like an inheritance of stone. Preston Mercer had bought the hospital bills for pennies on the dollar from a debt broker in Providence. He was that kind of man, the kind who saw suffering and smelled opportunity. He owned this diner where she worked, owned the building above it, owned half the blocks in this neighborhood. He wore tailored suits and smile that never reached his eyes. The waitress apron hung on the plastic chair. 6 months of double shifts, and it showed. The fabric was worn thin at the ties, stained with coffee grounds and ketchup, little tears along the hem from being caught on cabinet handles and door frames. She had worn this apron through her last birthday. She had worn it through for eviction notices. She had worn it until the seams understood her suffering better than any person ever could. The rain started at 11 that night. Cassandra locked up the diner at closing time, her body moving through the routine like a machine, wiping down the counter, counting the register, sweeping the floor. The other waitresses had left hours ago. It was just her and the night manager, a quiet man named Joe who kept his head down and asked no questions. The parking lot was empty except for her beat-up Honda Civic and one other car, a luxury sedan that didn't belong to anyone who worked here. She noticed it because everything out of place mattered when you had nothing. A car like that meant money. Money meant power. Power meant you could destroy people without consequence. She was fumbling with her keys when the sky opened. The rain came in sheets, not falling but attacking, the kind of summer thunderstorm that turned the world into a black water. Lightning split the clouds in half, and for one moment the parking lot was brighter than noon. Thunder followed, so loud it made her teeth ache. That was when she saw the child. A girl, maybe 6 years old, wearing a blue sundress that was already soaked through. She stood at the edge of the parking lot, her small form silhouetted against the headlights from the street beyond. The child wasn't moving. She was just standing there, trembling, staring at the cars speeding past in the rain. The little girl took a step forward. No. 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 Cassandra dropped her purse. Her bad knee screamed as she ran, the orthopedic shoes splashing through the puddles, her breath ragged. The child was walking toward the busy street, and the cars kept coming, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights hunting prey. A delivery truck was approaching, its massive grille filling the view, its driver's eyes locked on the road ahead. Cassandra lunged. She grabbed the girl around the waist and pulled backward with every muscle in her exhausted body, and the delivery truck's horn blared so loud it seemed to crack the sky open again. The vehicle roared past, so close she could feel the heat of it, the displacement of air like a hand pushing her back. She fell hard, the child landing on top of her, both of them sprawling onto the wet asphalt. The rain poured down, plastering Cassandra's hair to her face, soaking through her waitress uniform. She lay there for a moment, gasping, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The child began to cry. Shh, Cassandra whispered, pushing herself up on her elbows. You're okay. You're okay now. I have you. She gathered the girl against her chest, wrapped her in her own cardigan, the only warm thing she owned, and limped back toward the diner awning. The child was small, maybe 40 pounds, with dark hair plastered to her forehead and eyes that were wide and unspeaking. She clung to Cassandra's neck without words, without explanation, like someone who had learned early that asking for help was dangerous. What's your name, sweetie? Cassandra asked, settling them both under the overhang. Are you lost? Where's your mommy? The child didn't answer. She just trembled and held on tighter. 3 minutes passed. 4. Cassandra sat there in the diner's side alcove, soaked through, shivering, holding this small stranger while the rain hammered the pavement. She didn't know who the child was. She didn't know where she had come from. She only knew that letting go of her felt like drowning. A black SUV screeched into the parking lot with its headlights blazing. 2 men jumped out before the vehicle had fully stopped. Both wore expensive suits, the kind that cost more than Cassandra's monthly rent. Both moved with the controlled urgency of men who were used to solving problems through force and money. "Emma," the first man called out, his voice tight with panic. "Emma!" Cassandra stood carefully, the child still clinging to her neck. The men approached, their eyes scanning the parking lot, and when they saw her, wet, poor, holding their charge, something shifted in their faces. Recognition mixed with questions they didn't yet know how to ask. The taller one, whose suit was charcoal and whose build suggested violence lived in his training, reached out for the child. "Emma." "Thank God. Thank God." The other man, smaller, faster, stepped toward Cassandra. "Who are you?" His voice came out hard, not quite threatening but close enough. Cassandra looked at him. She looked at the child in her arms, who was already reaching toward the first man but not letting go of her. She looked at the black SUV with its engine running, its interior lit up with the kind of expensive leather that matched the men's shoes. "I'm just a waitress," she said quietly. "I work at the diner." She was in the parking lot. The rain started, and she walked toward the street. I pulled her back. The man with the hard voice pulled out a money clip. Hundreds, folded fresh. He held them out toward her, a roll of cash that looked like it had never been crumpled. "Thank you. What's your name?" Cassandra shook her head. She was already limping backward, her bad knee throbbing now, adrenaline fading. "I don't want money. Just keep her safe. That's all that matters." She handed the child over to the first man, who cradled her against his chest like she was made of spun glass. The little girl, Emma, finally stopped trembling. She rested her forehead against his shoulder, and her small hand closed around his expensive silk tie. Cassandra turned away before they could ask her name again, before they could insist on the money, before they could somehow cement this moment into permanence. She limped across the parking lot toward her car, her cardigan, now soaked and ruined, still dripping onto the wet asphalt. She didn't look back. But what neither Cassandra nor the 2 men knew was that the child's father was already en route to that parking lot, already driving through the rain with his fists clenched around the steering wheel, already a man transformed by fear into something more dangerous than his usual ruthlessness allowed. And the woman who had asked for nothing, who had wanted nothing except to keep a stranger's child safe, had just set into motion a series of events that would reshape the entire landscape of her life. The court summons sits on her kitchen table like a blade, white paper against chipped laminate, the words blurring through her tears. Criminal theft. Felony charges. Court date tomorrow at 9 in the morning. Cassandra reads the document 4 times, each word cutting deeper than the last, her hands shaking so badly she can barely hold the paper steady. She has $78 in her checking account. $78 to her name in the entire world. The money sits in her wallet like a cruel joke, not enough for groceries, not enough for a lawyer, not nearly enough to prove her innocence in a system that has already decided she is guilty. The images from social media still burn behind her eyes. Her face. Her name. The security footage that shows someone who looks exactly like her pocketing cash from the register. Except Cassandra knows with absolute certainty that those hands are not her hands. That walk is not her walk. The angles are wrong, too smooth, too deliberate. But the internet does not care about angles or certainty. The internet only cares about destruction, and it has chosen her. She sits on her bed in the apartment that smells like old carpet and regret, a uniform still hanging by the door, the one Doug told her not to come back in. He could not meet her eyes when the police led her out of the diner. He just shook his head sadly, as if she had disappointed him personally, as if she had chosen to betray him instead of simply being chosen as a target by someone far more powerful than a night shift waitress could ever fight alone. The bruises on her throat throb in rhythm with her heartbeat. Dark purple handprints where someone had grabbed her, someone she does not even know, probably hired by Preston Mercer to deliver a message. The message was simple: stop fighting. Surrender. Accept that you are nobody and nothing matters. But Cassandra had not surrendered. Instead, she had driven across the city in the dark, following an instinct she could not name, arriving at Santoro's restaurant with one eye swollen shut and blood drying on her lip and a court summons in her shaking hand. She had walked through that door not knowing if she would find kindness or get thrown out onto the street. She had found Nicholas Moretti instead. Now, in the silence of her apartment at 2 in the morning, she thinks about the way he had caught her before she fell. The way his hands had been surprisingly gentle for a man whose name carried the weight of an entire underworld. She thinks about Emma coloring in the booth, humming softly, completely unaware that her father was a dangerous man. She thinks about how Nicholas had told Marco to get the first aid kit, how he had personally pressed ice to her swollen eye while his men watched with expressions of shock they could not quite hide. "You're not alone anymore," he had said. But that was a beautiful lie. She is more alone now than ever. Tomorrow morning she will walk into a courtroom alone. No lawyer. No family. No one who can speak for her character or explain that the footage is a fabrication or prove that Preston Mercer has been orchestrating this entire catastrophe because she refused to be his puppet. She opens her laptop. The video has been viewed 700,000 times. The comment section is a graveyard of cruelty. Hundreds of strangers calling her a thief, a criminal, a burden on society who deserves whatever is coming to her. Some comments are worse than others. Much worse. She scrolls past them, each one landing like a punch, and forces herself to close the browser. At 3 in the morning, her phone buzzes. Unknown number. Her heart stops. But the message is different this time. It is not a threat. "Your hearing is at 9. We will be there. NM." She stares at those initials for a full minute, unable to process what they mean. Nicholas Moretti does not help people like her. Men like that do not walk into courtrooms. But then her phone buzzes again. This time it is an email. From Moretti and Associates Legal Defense. The subject line reads, "Rivera v. the Commonwealth, Evidentiary Analysis." Cassandra reads the first paragraph and realizes that somewhere in the night, between the moment she collapsed in his restaurant and this moment, Nicholas Moretti has hired lawyers for her. Real lawyers. The kind that cost more money than she will earn in 3 years. She does not sleep. Instead, she sits by the window and watches the darkness turn gray and then slowly, inevitably, into morning. Across the city, in a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River, Cordelia Blackwood swirls champagne in a crystal flute and smiles at Preston Mercer like a predator sizing up prey. The suite is decorated in pale marble and gold accents, everything expensive and sterile and cold. Preston paces near the windows, his phone in his hand, his expression fluctuating between satisfaction and a low-level anxiety he cannot quite name. "She'll be destroyed by noon," Cordelia says, her voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "The judge will see the video, see her criminal record, the one I had added to her file this morning, and she will be convicted before her public defender even finishes his opening statement." "She doesn't have a public defender," Preston says. He received a call from Doug at the diner. Apparently, men in expensive suits had arrived asking questions about the security footage. Very specific questions. Questions that made Doug's stomach twist with guilt, which was not part of Preston's plan. Some lawyers appeared. "I don't know who hired them yet." Cordelia stops swirling her champagne. She sets the glass down with a deliberate clink. "Who?" "I'm trying to find out." "Try harder." Preston's phone buzzes. He opens the text message from a contact labeled only as a VC and reads the words 3 times before his face goes pale. "What is it?" Cordelia asks, already knowing something has shifted. Victor Castellano is offering to handle the situation. He says he has a way to make Cassandra Rivera disappear completely. Says he wants to do Moretti a favor and prove he's serious about respecting territory lines. Preston looks up from his phone. But that doesn't make sense. Moretti wouldn't. Moretti wouldn't what? Cordelia interrupts, standing now, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the marble countertop. Wouldn't care about a waitress? Wouldn't spend money defending her? Wouldn't send his people to ask questions about security footage? The two of them stare at each other across the penthouse as the sun rises over Boston like a warning. 3 blocks from the courthouse, Nicholas Moretti sits in the back of a black SUV with tinted windows, wearing a charcoal suit that costs more than Cassandra makes in a month, his expression absolutely unreadable. Marco drives. Pietro sits in the passenger seat. The radio plays soft Italian opera that Nicholas requested specifically because opera understands tragedy in a way that modern music never could. The lawyers have the evidence, Marco says quietly. 3 digital specialists examined the security footage. They can prove frame by frame that it was edited. The timeline doesn't match her shifts. The angles are impossible. What about Preston Mercer's connection to the debt? Nicholas asks. Deeper than we thought. He doesn't own the building, Cordelia Blackwood owns it through a shell company registered in Delaware. She's been manufacturing tenant situations for years. Creates crises, forecloses, develops the properties, sells them for 10 times the purchase price. Cassandra wasn't a victim of bad luck. She was selected. Nicholas nods slowly. And Victor Castellano? That is the problem, Pietro says, turning from the front seat. He made a call to Mercer at 2:17 this morning. We intercepted it. Castellano wants to prove his loyalty to you by removing Cassandra as a complication. He thinks she is leverage you are keeping for some reason. He is planning something for before the hearing. Nicholas's jaw tightens. How long before? 30 minutes. The SUV accelerates through a red light. Cassandra stands outside the courthouse in a borrowed suit that almost fits. Nicholas had sent clothes to her apartment at 5 in the morning with a handwritten note that simply said, "Wear this. You will be fine." The suit is navy blue and expensive and makes her look almost respectable, almost like someone who belongs in a courtroom instead of a restaurant kitchen. She keeps touching the fabric unconsciously, looking for something that feels familiar. The lawyers arrive, 3 of them, all sharp-eyed and carrying leather briefcases. They brief her on the strategy, the digital evidence, the timeline discrepancies, the financial records showing Mercer's pattern of property manipulation. They tell her they will destroy Cordelia Blackwood's credibility. They tell her she will walk out of that courthouse exonerated. But then a black SUV pulls up directly in front of the courthouse entrance and the lawyers go very still. Nicholas emerges from the back seat looking like something that walked out of a noir film, expensive suit, dark eyes, the kind of presence that makes people unconsciously step backward. Marco and Pietro flank him. 3 more men in tailored suits stand by the vehicle. Every person on the courthouse steps freezes. Cassandra sees him and something in her chest breaks open like ice cracking in spring. Nicholas walks directly toward her. The lawyers part automatically. The building itself seems to hold its breath. Cassandra, he says, and the way he says her name is like a benediction, like an oath, like a promise made in Italian stone centuries ago. You are going to walk into that courtroom with your head raised. You are going to remember that you saved my daughter's life without knowing who she was or what it might cost you. You are innocent. And everyone in that room will know it. Her voice comes out barely a whisper. Why are you doing this? Because you chose mercy when the world was teaching you to choose survival. That matters. You matter. He reaches into his jacket and pulls out a photograph. Emma, smiling, holding a drawing of a woman with red hair and a kind face. On the back, in a child's careful printing, for the nice rain lady. I love you. Cassandra's knees buckle. Nicholas catches her elbow, steadies her. Let's go, he says. Let's go show them who you really are. The courthouse steps held their breath as the morning sun broke across the marble like a blade-splitting stone. Cassandra Rivera stood alone in her waitress uniform, the fabric still stained with coffee from the night shift, her orthopedic shoes planted firmly on the cold stone, her court summons clutched in both hands like it might shatter if she loosened her grip. 20 feet away, Preston Mercer smiled. Not the smile of a man concerned about justice. The smile of a man who had already won. Cordelia Blackwood stood beside him in a cream-colored suit that cost more than everything Cassandra owned, her hair perfectly coiffed, her expression arranged into something resembling sympathy. But her eyes gleamed with cruelty. She leaned toward Preston and spoke just loud enough for Cassandra to hear. "Look at her," Cordelia said, her voice dripping like poison. "Playing the victim. It's actually pathetic." Preston laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Should have paid your debts, sweetheart. Should have minded your business and kept your mouth shut." Cassandra's hands trembled. Her jaw clenched so tightly she thought her teeth might crack. She stepped forward, her voice barely steady. "I didn't steal anything and you know it." Before Preston could respond, a black Mercedes pulled up directly in front of the courthouse entrance. The doors opened like wings. A man emerged in his late 20s wearing a suit that cost more than his character deserved, gold rings on 3 fingers, cologne so thick you could smell it from 10 feet away. His arrogance was written across his face like a scar you couldn't hide. Victor Castellano. He walked directly toward Cassandra, his footsteps echoing off the marble steps like a countdown. Preston and Cordelia exchanged a glance, confused but interested. This wasn't part of their plan. This was something better. "So you're the waitress making trouble for important people," Victor said, stopping inches from her face. His breath smelled like cigarettes and expensive whiskey. "My uncle used to run this city before Moretti. Now I'm taking it back, starting with his little pet projects. Starting with you." Cassandra stepped backward, but Victor's hand shot out and grabbed her arm. His fingers dug into her skin like claws. "You're going to help me," he said. "You're going to tell Moretti that protecting you was a mistake." "I don't know what you're talking about," Cassandra whispered, trying to pull away. Victor leaned closer, his voice dropping to something that sounded like a threat wrapped in velvet. "Tell him Victor Castellano doesn't forget disrespect. Tell him that anyone who stands against me will burn like his enemies burned." He shoved her backward. Her spine hit the courthouse railing hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. Preston watched with satisfaction written across his face. Cordelia's smile widened. This was perfect. They didn't have to destroy her alone anymore. Now someone with resources and rage was doing it for them. Victor turned back to Preston. "You've got this handled." "By the end of the day, she'll be convicted," Preston said. "No witnesses. No defense. No hope." The courtroom doors opened 30 minutes later. Cassandra sat at the defendant's table alone, absolutely alone, with no lawyer beside her and no one in the gallery who believed in her. The prosecutor stood, shuffled papers with the confidence of a man who had already won, and presented the security footage. There it was. Cassandra's image, or an image that looked like her image, reaching into the register. Taking money. Putting it in her apron pocket. 3 times. Clear as daylight. Doctored so carefully that only someone looking for the alterations would see the slight shimmer in the pixels, the shadow that didn't quite match the light, the frame rate that stuttered for just a moment. The judge looked down at Cassandra. "Do you have legal representation?" She shook her head. Tears began streaming down her face before she could stop them. "Will you be representing yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor," she whispered. The prosecutor called the diner manager to the stand. He testified that the money went missing. He testified that Cassandra had been working that shift. He testified that her reputation had been questioned in the community. Everything true enough to sound like evidence. Everything a lie wrapped in the language of fact. Cassandra tried to speak. Tried to explain. But without a lawyer, without evidence of her own, without anyone standing beside her, her words fell into the courtroom like stones into a well, disappearing into darkness. The judge was about to render a verdict when the courtroom doors burst open with enough force to rattle the hinges. Nicholas Moretti walked in. He did not run. He did not hurry. He simply walked, and the entire room reorganized itself around his presence like iron filings responding to a magnet. Behind him came 3 lawyers in $1,000 suits carrying leather briefcases that looked like they contained truth itself. The prosecutor went pale. The judge's expression shifted from certainty to caution. Nicholas took the seat beside Cassandra without asking permission. His presence filled the space like gravity itself had shifted. He placed one hand on the table, a hand bearing a silver ring that caught the courtroom light, and looked directly at the judge. "My client will be entering a not guilty plea," he said, his voice like thunder wrapped in silk. "And we have evidence to present." The lead lawyer stood. His suit was charcoal gray. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His confidence filled the room like cold water. "Your Honor, the security footage in question has been digitally altered. We have the original files from the diner's backup server, independent confirmation from the manufacturer's cloud storage, showing no theft occurred at any point during the alleged time frame." The prosecutor's jaw clenched. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, his voice steady as a metronome, "We have secured Mr. Mercer's banking records, which show a pattern of embezzlement spanning 3 years. The money that went missing from the register was taken by Mr. Mercer himself to cover gambling debts accumulating at approximately $15,000 per month." Preston lurched to his feet. "That's a lie." "Sit down," the judge said quietly. The lawyer continued as if Preston had never spoken. "Additionally, we have documented evidence of conspiracy. Ms. Blackwood and Mr. Mercer deliberately fabricated charges against Ms. Rivera for the purpose of forcing her eviction from her apartment at 428 Ashland Street, a property they intended to sell to commercial developers for $700,000, with Mr. Mercer receiving $450,000 and Ms. Blackwood receiving $250,000. The entire courtroom fell silent. The kind of silence that happens when everyone is simultaneously calculating how badly they have misjudged the situation. Cordelia's face drained of color. Literally drained, like someone had turned off the blood supply to her skin. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. The judge ordered a recess. In the hallway, something shifted. News cameras had arrived, at least 8 of them, along with reporters holding microphones that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Someone had called them. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. Nicholas's men. They had known exactly when this moment would arrive. Preston and Cordelia tried to leave through a side entrance, but reporters surrounded them like sharks scenting blood. "Is it true you framed an innocent woman? Did you doctor the security footage? Mr. Mercer, how many other tenants have you evicted using false accusations?" Preston's arrogance shattered like glass. His face crumpled. He pushed through the reporters, trying to run, but the crowd had grown. More people with phones. More cameras recording. The original security footage started playing on the screens. Someone had uploaded it to every platform simultaneously, showing Preston himself reaching into the register with his own hands, extracting cash, and then using video editing software to composite Cassandra's image into the frame. The timestamp showed it clearly. The dates were impossible. The timestamps didn't match. And worst of all, you could see his face in the corner of the unedited footage, his reflection in the register glass, his hands committing the crime he had accused her of. Cordelia's social media erupted within minutes. Her Instagram flooded with comments. Her Twitter mentions became a tsunami of condemnation. People she had called friends, socialites and business partners and social climbers, began posting screenshots, distancing themselves, claiming they had never trusted her anyway. Her businesses received cancellation notices. Her speaking engagements were terminated. The same platforms she had used to destroy Cassandra were now destroying her with mathematical precision, each person adding their voice to a growing chorus of rage. Preston watched his entire world collapse in real time. His phone buzzed with termination notices from other landlords who didn't want to be associated with him. His lawyer abandoned him. Other property owners who had worked with him for years suddenly became strangers. He stood against the courthouse wall, trembling like a cornered animal, his voice barely a whisper. "Please," he begged. "This is a misunderstanding. I can explain everything." But nobody listened. Nobody had time for his explanations. The truth was spreading too fast, moving like fire through dry grass, consuming everything in its path. Victor Castellano tried to slip away, but found 12 men in black suits blocking every exit. They moved like shadows given human form, their faces blank, their intent absolute. Marco stepped forward with the casual confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before. "Mr. Moretti would like a word," Marco said. They escorted Victor to a black SUV where Nicholas waited. The interior smelled like leather and cold air. The door closed and the sound died, completely sealed away from the world outside. Nicholas's voice was perfectly calm. Worse than anger. Worse than rage. Just perfectly, reasonably calm. "You put your hands on someone under my protection," Nicholas said. Victor tried to bluster. His arrogance was already cracking. "You can't touch me. My family." "Your family is dead," Nicholas said, "and their territory is mine. You are nobody. Do you understand that word? Nobody. Nothing. Invisible. That's what you are." Victor's hands began shaking. "Here's what happens next," Nicholas continued. "You leave Boston tonight. You don't come back. You don't speak her name again. You don't even think about her. Because if you do, what I did to your uncle will look like mercy compared to what I'll do to you." Victor nodded, his arrogance completely dissolved, his expensive cologne suddenly smelling like fear. "And Victor?" Nicholas said. "If I ever hear that you've touched another innocent person, if I ever hear your name connected to extortion or fraud or violence against someone weaker than you, I will find you. No matter how far you run. I will find you." Marco drove him to the airport personally. Watched him board the plane. Watched it take off into the sky, carrying him away from Boston, away from everything he had thought he controlled, away from the consequences he had not imagined could find him. Back at the courthouse, the judge rendered her verdict. "All charges dismissed," she said, her gavel striking the bench with the sound of finality. "Ms. Rivera, you are exonerated. The court finds no evidence of wrongdoing on your part and substantial evidence of conspiracy and fraud on the part of the defendants." The courtroom erupted. Not in anger, but in something closer to justice finally being served, like a scale that had been tipped wrong suddenly realigning itself. Preston was led away in handcuffs, his face ashen, his entire world dismantled in 4 hours. FBI agents arrested Cordelia on the courthouse steps as cameras recorded every moment. They led her to a federal vehicle while her former friend stood at a distance, already spinning stories about how they had always suspected her, how they had tried to warn people but no one had listened. The charges came quickly after that. Federal fraud. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Evidence tampering. Extortion. 40 years pending sentencing for Preston. 35 for Cordelia. Her high society friends filmed her humiliation and posted it online. The same platforms she had used to build her reputation of cruelty were now dismantling it in real time. Outside the courthouse, as the afternoon sun carved long shadows across the marble steps, Cassandra stood free. Outside the courthouse, as the afternoon sun carved long shadows across the marble steps, Cassandra Rivera stood free. The yellow bruises across her throat had faded to the color of old tea stains. Her left eye, swollen shut just days before, opened fully now onto a world that had finally stopped lying about her. She held the exoneration letter in trembling hands, the paper thin enough to tear, the words thick enough to carry the weight of her entire life. Preston Mercer sat in a holding cell 2 floors below, his tailored suit rumpled like discarded tissue, his face the color of wet concrete. The handcuffs bit into wrists that had never known restraint. A guard slid a metal tray through the slot. He did not touch it. Around him, the fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song, and somewhere in the distance, another cell door clanged shut with the sound of finality. Cordelia Blackwood stood on the courthouse steps in front of every camera in Boston. FBI agents flanked her on both sides, their dark suits absorbing the afternoon light. She wore the same cream-colored dress she had worn to charity galas, the one that cost more than Cassandra's annual rent. But now it hung on her like a costume, the fabric suddenly cheap, the woman inside suddenly small. Photographers captured her face, the perfect mask finally cracking, showing the void beneath. Her former friends, the ones who had laughed at her dinner parties and copied her cruelty, stood at a careful distance. They had already begun the work of separation, whispering to journalists about how they had always suspected something, how they had tried to warn people. The machinery of social destruction, once directed at Cassandra, now turned on its architect with perfect, pitiless efficiency. The federal charges came down like thunder. Wire fraud. Conspiracy to commit extortion. Evidence tampering. 40 years for Preston. 35 for Cordelia. The numbers should have felt like victory, but standing on those courthouse steps, Cassandra felt only exhaustion, the kind that lives in bones and breathes in lungs. A town car pulled up to the curb. Marco stepped out first, his massive frame unfolding from the vehicle like a blade opening. He nodded to her, a gesture that meant Nicholas was ready. Cassandra climbed inside, and the car moved through Boston streets toward the restaurant, toward what came next. 2 weeks later, the bruises had become memory. Cassandra sat at a corner table in Moretti's, the Italian restaurant that occupied the ground floor of a building Nicholas owned but never entered through the front door. Emma colored at the next table, her small tongue poking out in concentration as she worked blue crayon across white paper. Marco and Pietro played cards in the back, their movements casual, their attention never truly leaving the room. Nicholas emerged from the kitchen carrying a small ceramic cup. Espresso, dark as midnight. On the saucer beside it, a single cannoli dusted with powdered sugar. He placed both on the table and sat across from her, the space between them carrying the weight of everything unsaid. "The debt is gone," he said. His voice came quietly, the way important things are always said. "The medical bills your mother left behind. The foreclosure notice. All $22,000. I purchased the debt from the estate and forgave it. You owe nothing." Cassandra's hands, calloused from years of holding coffee pots and carrying the weight of survival, began to shake. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You already did," Nicholas replied. "You saved my daughter when you had nothing. When you could have walked past that parking lot and closed your eyes. You didn't." They sat in the kind of silence that only exists between people who have seen each other at their breaking point. The restaurant hummed around them, ice in glasses, the soft clink of plates being cleaned in the kitchen, the sound of a city continuing its daily work outside the windows. "What happens now?" Cassandra asked. "I can't return to the diner. Doug fired me the day after my arrest, and even though the charges were dismissed, he said his customers were uncomfortable. And my apartment, the landlord changed the locks before the trial even started. I have nowhere to live." Nicholas slid an envelope across the table. Inside, Cassandra found a letter on official restaurant letterhead, an offer of employment, and a set of keys. Manager position at a restaurant 2 blocks away. Salary 3 times what she had made at the diner. Apartment upstairs included. Benefits. Health insurance. The kind of security that felt like fiction when you had lived on $78 and hope. "I don't understand why they would hire me," Cassandra said, her voice small. "After everything. After the accusations." "Because I own the building," Nicholas said simply. "But the restaurant does not need me. It needs someone honest who understands what it means to work. Someone who will not steal from the business or the customers. I need someone I trust." Cassandra laughed, and it came out broken like glass. "I promise I won't steal from you." "I know," he said. And then he stood, and Emma looked up from her coloring to watch him cross the room. He touched her hair briefly, the gentlest gesture, the kind of touch he gave to almost no one else, and then he was gone, leaving through the back, as he always did. Over the next months, Cassandra transformed the restaurant. She arrived before dawn to check inventory. She worked through the evening service, but not the desperate double shifts that had broken her body and stolen her sleep. She slept now in a real bed with clean sheets. She ate real meals, not leftovers salvaged from the garbage, but food she purchased with money she had earned. Her hands healed. The lines around her eyes softened. She began to look like a woman who might survive, rather than a woman who was already dying. Nicholas visited every week, always polite, always distant. He brought Emma on Saturdays, and the little girl would follow Cassandra around the kitchen, asking questions, stealing cookie dough when she thought no one was watching. Cassandra noticed how Nicholas was gentle only with his daughter, how he kept everyone else at arm's length, carrying the weight of his brother's betrayal in the rigid set of his shoulders, in the way he never quite relaxed, never quite trusted. One evening, while Cassandra was counting the register, she heard Marco and Pietro talking in the corner booth. "Boss is different since the trial," Marco said. "Quieter than before." "He has been quiet since his brother betrayed him," Pietro replied. "Does not trust easy. Never has. Except her. I saw him smile last week when she made that joke about the oregano. Actual smile. Not the fake thing he does for business." Cassandra's hand stilled over the cash drawer. She understood then that Nicholas had given her more than a job. He had given her back her life when he had no reason to, asking nothing in return except that she exist, that she survive, that she be okay. She wanted to thank him properly, but he always left before she found the words. 1 year later, Cassandra Rivera stood at a penthouse window overlooking Boston. The city spread beneath her like a circuit board of light, each window a life being lived, each street a story unfolding. She wore an elegant black dress, expensive but not ostentatious, purchased with money she had earned. Her restaurant had expanded to a second location. Her savings account held numbers that would have seemed impossible 2 years ago. The penthouse belonged to her, purchased through her own work and Nicholas's investment as a silent partner. Summer evening. Warm breeze carrying the salt smell of the harbor. Behind her, she heard footsteps on marble tile. She turned to find Nicholas in the doorway, still wearing his suit despite the late hour, his face carrying the weight of his world. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly. Cassandra crossed toward him, her heart finding a rhythm it had not known before. "But you are." Nicholas stepped onto the balcony, keeping distance between them like a man approaching something sacred. "A year ago you stumbled into my restaurant with bruises on your neck and the weight of the world trying to crush you. I thought I was simply repaying a debt. A life for a life. A balance sheet." He turned to face her fully, and in the city light, she could see that his eyes had changed. Something had softened there, some wall finally cracking. "But it was never about debt," he continued. "You showed me that mercy is not weakness. That some people choose kindness even when the world gives them every reason to choose anger. You reminded me who I was before my brother's betrayal turned me into someone who only knew survival, only knew dominance, only knew how to protect by controlling everything around me." Cassandra's breath caught in her throat. "I have carried this truth for a year, staying away because I believed protecting you meant keeping my distance," Nicholas said. "But I was wrong. I was afraid. I am still afraid. Afraid that you deserve better than a man with blood on his hands and enemies at every door. But I am here anyway because you taught me that we choose fear or trust, closing ourselves off or opening our hearts." He stepped closer, and for the first time, Cassandra saw vulnerability in the eyes of the most powerful man in Boston. "I choose trust," Cassandra said. "I choose you." Nicholas pulled her close, and they kissed on the balcony overlooking the city, a year of distance finally breaking like a fever breaking, like a dawn coming after endless night. Below on the street, Marco and Pietro watched from the darkness and exchanged knowing looks. Their boss, finally letting someone in. Finally choosing something other than the weight of his empire. In a federal prison cell, Preston Mercer sat on a metal bunk in a space no larger than a closet. His cell was cold. His reputation was destroyed. His lawyers had abandoned him. Outside his small window, he could see other prisoners, other men who had believed they were untouchable. He was not special. He was just another name in a system that had finally caught up with his crimes. Cordelia Blackwood worked the register at a grocery store on the edge of the city, scanning items for customers who did not recognize her. Her silk blouses had been sold to pay legal fees. Her jewelry had been seized as evidence. The friends who had copied her cruelty now pretended they had never known her. She had become invisible in the way she had never imagined, not special, not powerful, just forgotten. The tables had turned completely. The cruelty she had orchestrated had returned to her in perfect measure. Justice had been served, not with violence, but with truth. 1 year later, Cassandra and Nicholas sat at a table in her restaurant with Emma between them, the little girl now 7 years old, safe and happy and laughing about something absurd. Cassandra watched Nicholas's face as his daughter spoke, watched how he listened like she was the most important person in the world. She thought about the night she had pulled Emma from that parking lot during the thunderstorm. She thought about how a single act of courage had changed everything. "They said I was nobody," Cassandra said softly, her voice carrying the weight of everything she had survived. "They said I was nothing, that I was alone, that I deserved what happened to me. But I learned that we are never truly alone when we choose courage over fear. When we choose truth over lies. When we choose to open our hearts instead of closing them against the world." Nicholas reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Every single day, we make a choice," Cassandra continued. "Between fear and trust. Between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts to the possibility that someone might see us, might help us, might love us. That choice, more than anything else, defines who we become." If this story moved you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Subscribe because we post stories like this every single day, stories about courage, about redemption, about the power of choosing trust over fear. Drop a comment telling us which moment hit you hardest. We read every single one. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.